Good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. We begin tonight with the economy and the transition that's underway, moving from the Biden years to the Trump way of doing things. One man, a lifelong tax and spend politician, the other, a businessman and a successful realtor. Well, the difference says everything you need to know about the hole we were in economically versus the progress going on now with Donald Trump back in the White House. Republicans on the Hill are moving ahead to pass the tax cut bill later this year. Regulations have been reduced big time for both small and large businesses. Government spending is being cut like we've never seen before. Large foreign and American companies are investing in building new businesses here at home. And there are the tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, as President Trump calls them. Dozens of countries have called the White House to work out a deal, but there is one big holdout: China, which brings us to our guest tonight. Gordon Chang, welcome back to our show.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor.
You know, I think most Americans were focused on inflation when they voted for Trump. So it's been a big learning curve to find out how disadvantaged this country has been by having the exports we produce marked up by foreign governments, while the products we import from them are often discounted by those same foreign governments. The biggest player is China. They know it, and we know. Well, this morning, China said they will not be blackmailed and they will fight to the end. Gordon, can you please start by giving us your interpretation of what that means?
Well, the Commerce Ministry, which said that, basically was trying to intimidate President Trump. Now, we hold all the high cards in this struggle. We're, first of all, the larger economy. China is less than 2/3 the size of us, but also they are the trade surplus country. Last year, their merchandise trade surplus with us was $295.4 billion. The only way China can win this is actually to intimidate President Trump into preemptively surrendering, even though he's got all the leverage. And essentially, China is not going to give up. But President Trump, he's not going to be intimidated because he knows that he's got those high cards.
Well, total trade with China is about $582 billion, but only $140 billion is U.S. exports to China. They put up big barriers to U.S. products selling there, and they pay their own people very little. So along with internal subsidies, they've been able to grow their advantage every year. Am I right in that analysis?
Well, yes. And also one other thing, and that is China steals hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. intellectual property each year, perhaps as much as $500 billion, as John Ratcliffe, when he was Director of National Intelligence, said in December 2020. So we're talking a lot of loss through that. So that's China's other advantage in terms of its trade with the United States. It's criminal as well as predatory.
Gordon, you've said recently that the Chinese leader is facing a lot of internal problems of his own. Members of his own party quitting, being fired. But first, listen to how Trump sees this reciprocal tariff battle.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen. We have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream.
Most people had no idea that Americans got penalized this much on the products they buy that are shipped here. How will the Chinese leader react when our president gets tough, given how many problems Xi has now?
The problem for Xi Jinping is that he cannot act economically rationally. And the reason is that he's configured the Chinese political system so that only the most belligerent answers are considered acceptable, which means Xi Jinping knows he needs to do a deal with President Trump. I think he also knows he's got to make big concessions to the United States, but it's very hard for him to start that conversation, as Trump said a few hours ago. And it's also very hard for Trump to make concessions because the way that he has set all of this up. So right now, I think he's boxed in.
Do you think the president's boxed in or Xi is boxed in?
Xi Jinping is boxed in. We got all the freedom of action that we can deal with. Remember, We have 70 plus countries around the world are coming to the Trump administration looking for a deal. China's not one of them. Everybody knows that the first people who sign up deals are going to get the best deals. And China's going to be the last one. And it's not going to be pretty for the Chinese economy.
You mentioned the pressure on President Trump. I'm assuming that's pressure from the financial markets, from the media. It's those external pressures within our nation that he's got to endure while he gets all these negotiations done?
Yes, and he has a lot of pressure, but I think he's also shown that he is going to withstand it. He knew what this was going to be like. As he said, these are tasks that had to be done because the current situation, the one going back for decades, has been unsustainable. These large trade deficits, the large overspending by the government, all of these big projects that President Trump is taking on. And of course, Wall Street doesn't like it. We know that because we can see what's happened since Tariff Day, April 2nd. But nonetheless, I think the markets are going to come back because they're going to see that the way we end up is at a lot better place than where we started with regard to the tariffs.
Well, Gordon, please stay with us for one more segment. For those of you watching, we'd love for you to write us an email with your thoughts on this discussion. We read them all and we answer as many as we can fit at the end of the show. We'll be right back. We're back now with our country's wise China expert, Gordon Chang. His most recent book is called Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, given the book title, do you think the Chinese see this tariff battle as just another chance to bring destruction to America?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just trade. Of course, it's fentanyl, it's intellectual property theft, it's the cyber attacks, it's the infiltration of our political system. The list just goes on and on. But with trade, they think that they can weaken the United States. And they've been running these persistent trade surpluses against us because their policies are predatory and because of the criminal acts that China's engaged in stealing our intellectual property. So yes, this is one part of their plan of what's called unrestricted warfare.
Vietnam has already said that it wants to eliminate their tariffs, which were at 90%. They may love the idea of picking up business that's being done in China now if President Xi doesn't deal. There are others as well. So how might that affect how he responds?
Well, I think that President Trump, looks at this and sees that some countries are going to bring down their tariff and their non-tariff barriers, because Vietnam has a lot of non-tariff barriers as well. And as I mentioned, most people believe that the first countries that will end up with a deal with the United States are going to get the best arrangements. So China, which is standing on the sidelines, which is refusing to talk to the Trump administration, is not doing itself any favors, because eventually we are going to have access to a lot of markets that we've not had access to before. And China will therefore be a lot less important for the American economy.
You know, I'm thinking this fight with China isn't just about products, because there's sort of codependency between the two countries. But we've seen the spy balloons, the pictures of the Chinese naval ship building, their takeover of the Panama Canal ports, and there's a whole lot more as well. Is that part of what's driving the president's team to have a real showdown with Xi now, if it comes to that?
Well, it's not so much that the president wants a showdown with China. It's just that China's doing a number of things across the board which are unacceptable, which are dangerous, they're belligerent. And some of them are ending up in the deaths of Americans. So, for instance, the Communist Party is behind the sale of fentanyl to the U.S. That's 70,000 Americans who die each and every year from a policy that is set at the top of the Communist Party. These are not overdose deaths. These are murders. And we can say the same thing about the spread of COVID beyond China's borders. We don't know how COVID started 100%, but 100% we know that China, once this disease got out into central China, decided that the disease should spread to the United States and other countries. And that's 1.2 million Americans, Pastor, that died from a disease that should never have left the Wuhan area.
It's unbelievable. You know, the question I'm asked so frequently by people is, what can I do? I feel powerless. It seems like in this particular trade discussion with China, there is something we can do. We can decide that $10 cheaper on our flat screen television isn't worth sacrificing the future of our children for. Am I misunderstanding the nature of this battle and how it plays out with people that just live on Main Street?
Oh, that's absolutely right. And the other thing that we can do is we can talk to our legislators and demand country of origin labeling to make sure that the websites tell us where this stuff comes from so consumers can make a decision as to not buy this stuff from China. And the other thing is to make sure, tell your broker not to own any mutual funds that include Chinese stocks. We should be cutting our links with the Chinese regime, not funding their military, which is configured to kill Americans.
You know, I understand the combative, aggressive nature, I think, of the Chinese regime. What about the Chinese people, that broad population? What's their attitude towards America?
Yeah, I think most people in China, they want good relations with the U.S. And certainly they do not want war right now. You got a warlike Communist Party at the top. Xi Jinping probably believes a war of some sort is in his personal interest. But the Chinese people, they just don't want any of it. Really what they want is the prosperity that they had pre-COVID. And unfortunately, Xi Jinping has been making decisions that make that virtually impossible.
You know, we've seen Chinese banks popping up around the country. Is that part of the plan to weaken our dollar? Or if not, what is it about?
It's not so much weaken the dollar, but it is to gain a foothold in the United States and to be in our financial system, to be in the banking network. It's just another outpost for the Communist Party, an area where they can influence the American public. So, yeah, we got to get Chinese banks out of our country. And by the way, since they launder the proceeds for the fentanyl gangs, we can declare them to be of primary money laundering concern under the Patriot Act and unplug them from the US dollar system. You know, we didn't allow Pablo Escobar to run money through New York, but we're allowing the Chinese to do that. And that's on us.
That's amazing. You know, the legacy media seems determined to frame this tariff battle as something that they can use to diminish President Trump. If I'm hearing you, you seem to think it's common sense and good for the American people and good for American business. Is that a good summary of what's happening?
100%. I mean, we have got to rebalance our trade relations. You know, U.S. accounts for almost half of the world's trade deficits. That just can't go on. And we have to end this. We have to build factories in our country to rebuild communities. You drive through Detroit, the Rust Belt, through the South, you see all of these towns that have been devastated by the loss of good-paying jobs to China. We need to reverse that. I don't care what happens to Wall Street. I really care what happens to Main Street.
Amen. Well, Gordon Chang, thank you for spending time with us today. I hope you'll come back as this plays out over these next few months.
Well, thank you, Pastor. I look forward to that.
Well, in a moment, I'll have some thoughts of my own, and later, you take the microphone with your emails. I'll be right back. I believe we're in a season of shaking. The shaking may feel uncomfortable at the moment, but after the shaking, things become visible that just weren't visible before. When it comes to reciprocal tariffs, the legacy media is quick to push fear-inducing headlines and prognosis. Don't fall for it. It's just like the days of COVID some 5 years ago, the same manipulative attitudes and tools which made the fear of the virus so damaging, well, they're still operating in our midst. Let's not be so unprepared and gullible this time. I believe what's being initiated by this administration through tariffs is an expression of support for the American people. The administration is standing up for U.S. citizens, saying to foreign governments, you'll not take unfair advantage of us any longer. Well, as a nation, we can't continue to be ever dependent on an authoritarian regime like China for our goods and services. The numbers are clear. The math is unsettling. In fact, it's just easier not to think about it. It's uncomfortable in the moment, just as many times truth is uncomfortable when we bump into it. Well, the good news is we don't have to be afraid. We may get frightened and we may see fearful things, but we don't have to lead lives that are dominated by fear. I would remind you that Jesus didn't lead a life free of conflict or challenge. We find Jesus in boats during storms. He goes to his hometown. They tried to kill him. He healed someone and they told him he did it on the wrong day. He faced all sorts of challenges until they finally nailed him to a Roman cross. What we see in Jesus is that he's never panicked. If he has to feed a multitude with a happy meal, he's completely confident that there's enough for everybody. If he faces a demon in a person, he's completely confident that he has the authority to address the unclean spirit. Well, the world has heard enough of the bleating of fear, confusion, and hatred. I would submit to you that it desperately needs to hear the roar of truth and righteousness from God's people. Listen to what Jesus said. It's John 14:27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I don't give to you as the world gives. Don't let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. In this time of uncertainty, let's meditate on what Jesus said to us. Memorize it. Put it in your heart. Jesus said, my peace I give you. This is our time in the arena. Be strong and courageous. There's no reason for us to fear. God has given us everything we need to fulfill our assignment. If we'll let that in our hearts, I promise you there's more reasons for courage and hope than for despair. When we return, I'm going to read some of your emails. Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts and opinions with us. We always look forward to reading your emails. Mark from Des Moines wrote, I suggest that we do a Doge guest sheet to each congressman and senator, asking them to list 5 things they did last week. How often could that list include, I voted on a bill? Well, I can think of a lot of things they could put on that sheet. You know, I leaked information to the media to try to embarrass our president or the administration. I mean, it's almost an endless list. I'll get in trouble if I go further. We interviewed a congressman recently who suggested that every congressional office, every congressman should cut $100,000 from their staff budget to give it back. All of those ideas sound pretty good to me. Bob from Cleveland, Tennessee, for quite some time, those in this nation who wish to have a one-world government have been doing their very best to accomplish that goal. They're the same ones who have resisted Donald Trump at every turn. I'm convinced that they'll stop at nothing, including violence, to prevent Donald Trump from accomplishing his goal of rejuvenating this nation's economy. Well, the violence against President Trump is not conjecture. We've seen that already. I think our daily prayers for those in authority over us are a very important part of the protection for our nation. I'm grateful for the Secret Service and all they do, but God's protections and the angels deployed around us are mission critical for the purposes of God coming in our generation. And I couldn't agree more, Bob. I think the tariffs and the discussions around our economy and returning jobs to the American workforce are an important part of strengthening our nation, one that's been overlooked for far too long. Lisa from North Carolina wrote, I like Representative Bean's bill to cut congressional staff by 5%. However, I'd recommend a 10% reduction in the House and Senate members' salaries as a show of support towards eliminating the U.S. debt. It also aligns with President Trump, Musk, and other cabinet members not taking a federal salary to do their jobs. Well, there has to be some cost-cutting measures put in place. Maybe nobody gets a raise until the budget's balanced or $1 trillion is cut from the deficit. Let's put some incentives out there for those leading us that incentivizes them to go in the wrong direction. I can tell you what I am tired of. I'm tired of people that we elect becoming millionaires with enormous resources while they lead our nation further into debt and weaken us. That has to stop. Kathy noted on YouTube with the interview with Jordan Rubin, I greatly appreciated that you invited Dr. Jordan Rubin to the table to discuss the importance of health and wellness. Overall health and well-being is possible if we stick to a healthy lifestyle undergirded by godly wisdom. And as Dr. Rubin shared, God has clearly laid out in the Holy Scriptures principles and right choices to help us thrive in every stage of life. Well, I have very much enjoyed the conversations with Jordan Rubin. He's even helped me make some healthier choices and get on a better pathway. I've even pushed chocolate to the back of the shelf, and I'm making healthier choices in my life. Healthier choices to help us lead healthier lives. It's not healthy choices in order to, as a means of righteousness. Don't confuse the two. We need our health so we can serve the Lord. And finally, RW from California said, the show's terrific. We're able to hear your guest, and the news you give is needed by the voters. Thank you. Well, you are welcome. We'll keep doing our work. If you haven't yet, you can go to ajnow.com. There you can see our most recent episode, ways to watch, and if you scroll down on the page, you can send your feedback and questions right there. It's an important part of our show. Well, I'm Alan Jackson. You have a wonderful evening.